On July 3rd, 1863, George Pickett asked James Longstreet, "General, shall I advance?" Longstreet nodded his consent, and with that, 15,000 Confederate soldiers began their mile-long march toward Cemetery Ridge. It became known as Pickett's Charge, and it was a bloody mess. An hour later, there were almost 7,000 casualties, and the charge had completely failed. It was the last large-scale engagement at Gettysburg, and it sent the Confederate Army on a retreat back to Virginia. Exactly 158 years later, we're here to honor the men who made that fateful charge. This is not so much a reenactment as it is a memorial march. Now, each of these men marching today has their own reasons for being here. Let's find out what some of them are.
I came out here today for a commemoration event to try and learn a little bit more about what these gentlemen went through, and to see the original ground that they went over, and to kind of see a little bit of history from someone else's perspective.
So it is July 4th weekend, and I think it's important to come out here to remember all the boys, both blue and gray, in one particular unit, the 57th Virginia. It's important to understand just a little bit of what they went through, just a tiny minuscule of what they endured, the ones that, well, all of them, but especially the ones that made it through. And I just thank God for our country and the fact that we have freedom to come out here and commemorate these men. Thank you very much.
I did this because this was an opportunity to recreate something on the actual day, near the actual time, on the actual ground. Just an experience that is rare to have, to be able to come together with some other living historians and be able to relive and get a sense of what happened that fateful July day.
You asked me why I wanted to do this? I wanted to do this because they did this, because they had no choice. They were told to charge these heights, they were told to win these heights, and they had to endure shot, shell, an amazing amount of trepidations that they had to go through this. That was a mile they had to walk. You know, in a society now where we're trying to forget our past, I'm here to remember our past and honor the ones. Yeah, they were Southern soldiers, but they were Americans, and they are part of us as well. And I'm here to honor them. I'm here to honor the ones that were on this side as well, the Union forces, because eventually we all came back together and we made a greater country than we were before this war. So that's why I'm here today.
Here's a satellite overview of Pickett's Charge. Our final destination was Armistead's monument at the Bloody Angle, but our starting point was the Virginia Monument at Confederate Avenue. For the July 3rd Memorial March, we rallied in the woods just below the Virginia Monument. We met up with some old friends and made some new ones. Here's some commentary from David Jackson, who participated in the Memorial March.
We were to meet at Gettysburg, July 3rd, 2021. Make our way over to Cemetery Ridge, park on Confederate Avenue near the Sons of Virginia Monument with the equestrian statue of Lee on top. I liked the way the heel plates on the brogan sounded on the road. We walked out the trail and met with the other reenactors already assembled. There were around 40 of us. It was a blessed reunion for many of us as we greeted our comrades, some of whom we haven't seen in years. Today, we were to honor the memory of the 57th Virginia Infantry of Armistead's Brigade by marching the ground that they marched in what is known as Pickett's Charge 158 years ago.
Our first order of business was to form up and practice some drill. After that, we then marched along the tree line to our first designated area, where some of the men were asked to read first-hand accounts of the survivors of Pickett's Charge.
The 57th Virginia was organized in September of 1861. added 5 independent companies to the already existing 5 companies of Keene's battalion. Most of the men were from Powhatan, Pennsylvania, and Botetourt County. Apparently we have someone from Pennsylvania. The unit was, of course, signed to General Armistead's brigade, originally it was commanded by Lou Armistead, and then when he was promoted up to brigadier commander, Colonel Keene took over. The first battle was really engaged in was Malvern Hill. They lost 113 men there. Then they were assigned to Anderson's division in the 1st Corps Army of Northern Virginia in July 1862, when the Army was reorganized after the 7 days battle. And in September of 1862, Major General George Pickett assumed command of their division. During most of 1862, the regiment was commanded by Colonel Dyer, who resigned in January of '63, and replaced by Colonel John Magruder, who commanded them here at Gettysburg. Prior to Gettysburg, the regiment had fought in the following engagements. Of course, Malvern Hill, 2nd Manassas, Sharpsburg, Shepherdstown Ford, which was after Sharpsburg, Fredericksburg, and the Siege of Suffolk. They then joined the Army of Northern Virginia, and they arrived in Gettysburg with slightly over 470 in the ranks.
Wow.
First read.
Impressive.
Encamped near Chambersburg at 1 a.m. on July 2nd, the regiment was awakened and marched towards Gettysburg. They passed through Chambersburg, then over the Blue Ridge, and upon arriving in Cashtown, now only 10 miles from the fighting, they could hear combat and began to receive reports of the fighting. They encamped that night in Salem. At 3 a.m., they drew an additional 20 cartridges and began the final advance to Gettysburg. 4 miles out, they filed to the right and marched 5 miles behind the western slope of Seminary Ridge. They arrived at 8 a.m. and lay down in the woods where the heat was stifling. At 1 p.m., the great cannonade began. The regiment lay down in the woods waiting for the order to advance. Many of the Federal shells went high over the Confederate batteries and struck the infantry laying down behind them. Some regiments losing as high as 15% of their men in the cannonade alone. As the cannonade ended, orders were shouted and the men reformed their lines where they lay. The regiment moved out of the woods and formed in the swale. Pickett gave a speech most of the men could not hear. Armistead yelled out, "Men, remember your wives, your mothers, your sisters, and your sweethearts." Battalion, shoulder, arm. Without doubling, right face.
We then formed and marched single file down the edge of a beautiful wheat field in full harvest glory, running the palms of our left hands over the newly ripe heads. The wheat field rose away from us on a slight rise so that we couldn't see what was in front of us, and also we couldn't be seen. I also noticed along the brush line ripe raspberries that could be descendants of raspberry bushes that may have been picked and eaten by the troops as they passed by. We were then ordered to forward march, and then, by files left, and up the rise we went. When we reached the top of the swale, we came into the full panoramic view of what lay ahead of us. We could see all of Cemetery Ridge, all the way down to the bald face of Little Round Top. So thinking back 158 years, if they could see all of that, then they can be seen as well. We stayed in single file until we crossed a fence and moved onto a mowed trail. We then got ourselves into the rhythm of an army marching in the common time. 40 pairs of feet tramping into the high brush, and tin cups slapping haversacks, beating out the cadence better than a company drummer. We had more time to ponder the sights, but not the sounds of just what July 3rd 1863 at approximately 2:45 must have been like on that hot afternoon during the charge. If there weren't a lot of praying men in the ranks before, there most likely would have been an abundance of them now. I will lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come from? There was no help from these hills that day. On Little Round Top was placed 6 10-pounder Parrots of Rittenhouse's battery, and they sighted Pickett's brigade just as soon as they crested the rise. They opened with an oblique fire and then ended with an enfilade fire, which means that the guns are facing the flanks of the opposing forces either dead on or at an angle. The range and elevation of these guns could easily hit Kemper's brigade on the far right, and also reach into and strike Garnett's and Armistead's brigades on the left. A percussion shell could cut out several files of men and then explode further on into the ranks, killing and wounding more. We couldn't imagine just what these men were going through. We were concerned about getting bit by ticks, but the men who actually marched these fields had to avoid getting cut to pieces by solid shot and case shot. In the 53rd Virginia, a Captain Fahrenholt watched as a single shell left a file of 13 men, in his words, in a perfect mangled mass of flesh and blood, indistinguishable one from the other. One hit in the 56th and killed or wounded 16 men. As the brigades moved forward, all the guns on Little Round Top but 2 were unable to continue firing. Sergeant Peoples and Sergeant Grady, both splendid shots, still manned these guns, and almost every shot pointed by these 2 men seemed to go where it was intended.
Double file.
We were retracing the steps of the 57th Virginia as best we could, but since these were active fields for the local farmers, we were asked not to damage any of their crops. Along a warm fence line, we stopped for a second reading. I was close to the end of the line, so the audio is pretty bad here, but listen carefully.
Order of arms.
While reaching the top of the rise, Armistead halted the brigade and dressed his ranks. Kemper rode to Armistead and asked for support. Armistead replied, "I'll do it." Look at my line. It never looked better on dress parade. As the regiment advanced over the crest, it began to take plunging and flooding fire from the round top. The round struck with fearful effect, sometimes taking as many as 10 men at a time killed and wounded in a single bursting shell. As the regiment continued to advance, they saw the disturbing view of the broken brigades of Brockenborough and Davis scampering to the rear. Over us, in front of us, behind us, and through our ranks, shot and bursting shells dealing out death. Nearly every minute the cry of mortal agony was heard above the rumble of guns. At almost every moment, guns, swords, haversacks, and human flesh and bones were flying and dangling in the air.
Jeez.
Great gaps were made in the line, but they were closed up as deliberately and promptly as if on the parade ground. The touch of elbows was always to the center, the men keeping constantly in view the little emblem which was their beacon light to guide them to glory and to death.
Shot, shell, shrapnel, and canister, thousands of deadly missiles racing through the air to thin the ranks.
A lieutenant stated, "My God, it was magnificent, this march of our men. What was the inspiration that gave them this stout courage, this gallant bearing, this fearlessness, this steadiness and individual heroism? It was home and country. It was the fever of patriotism and the high sense of individual duty. It was the blood and the pride of the state, the inherited quality of their brave and honorable ancestry."
Order!
Round tops are over there, and they're hitting them enfilade here. Holy, dude, that's reaching out and touch someone.
Right? Are those rifles?
What are you doing so far? Ground's treacherous. I know. As we were marching through the fields, some of us were commenting on the quality of our footwear. The soldiers in the Civil War were issued brogans, a simple leather shoe that offered very little support. Small, horseshoe-shaped metal plates were hammered into the heels to provide traction, if you could call it that. The leather soles were so slippery that some of us were having a difficult time walking through the tall grass. I know I was slipping all over the place. Many reenactors install hobnails into the soles for added traction, but that was an upgrade sorely lacking from my shoes. Most Civil War brogans were straight shoes and could be worn on either foot. They shaped themselves to the wearer's foot through use. Crooked shoes, which had a distinctive left and right shape to them, were wildly unpopular with the soldiers. As I was slipping on the grass, I couldn't help but notice how beautiful the day was. The weather was perfect. The temperature was in the upper 70s and the humidity wasn't bad either. I was a little warm in my wool uniform, but it could have been much worse. Back in 1863, the temperature on July 3rd was a hot and humid 87 degrees. I spent time during the march just admiring the beauty of my surroundings. The golden wheat beneath the blue sky was simply stunning to behold. It was almost too much for two eyes to see. But then I thought back to the men undertaking Pickett's charge. The beautiful fields surrounding me now probably felt like a death trap to them.
You see the monuments on Round Top. They're still playing in. We're still within sight of the batteries. My goodness.
So at that little round top, the one on the left, they would be having guns up there, and they would start firing on us. Already?
Yeah, the undulation in the land provided some security from view.
Well, you think they were motivated? Yeah. Off in the distance, I could see Little and Big Round Top, and I began to wonder just how much time I would have to ponder between the firing of a cannonball and it landing within my vicinity. On this day in 2021, we were greeted with bird songs and crickets, but in 1863, they must have been terrified by the thundering echoes of artillery screaming overhead. And still, they marched on. Our walk was easy, and the conversation jovial. The only thing we had to worry about was the stray bug bite and possibly twisting an ankle. I'm sure for the men in 1863, those were the least of their concerns. I remember at this point, our formation towards the end of the line became a little ragged as we crossed over that worm fence. We needed to catch up with the men in front of us, but I know I was too busy drinking in the scenery. I had never walked the ground of Pickett's charge before, and so I was trying to get a better lay of the land. Because of this, I was paying less attention to what I should have been doing, but we soon had it sorted out.
Right, Lee? Yep. There you go.
We marched parallel to the worm fence and eventually climbed over a broken section that led us back to the main path with the Virginia Monument way behind us. From here, the path curved along until we reached an orchard, where we stopped for a third reading.
As the regiment approached the Emmitsburg Road, Federal guns began to hammer the line with canister. Now the men began to advance in a half stoop, as if walking into a driving rainstorm. Everyone became a wild, kaleidoscopic whirl. All along the line, the officers and NCOs were shouting, "Close up! Close up!" Reaching the Emmitsburg Road, one veteran described it as, "We had to climb over the top of the fence, tumble over it, and fall flat into the bed of the road." All the while, the bullets continued to bury themselves into the bodies of the victims and the sturdy chestnut rails. Private William Monty of the 9th Virginia was heard to exclaim, "What a sublime sight! We have been just 19 minutes coming." These were his last words as he was killed by a shell. As the regiment advanced over the Emmitsburg Road, a lieutenant shouted, "Home, boys, home! Remember, home is beyond those hills." Home, boys, home.
Actually, that's what they said.
So take your time, gentlemen. Save your strength. Don't push too hard. Save it for the end.
Bunch up. Cool enough. I'm sure there were many of the oh shit moments in there. Yeah, I think it's like that. It's like
We then moved from a column of fours by company into line to a two-rank front, where we obliqued left and moved towards the ordered upon conversion point, the copse of trees where our charge would end.
Go.
a column of companies, gentlemen. Don't overrun.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Excellent.
Well done. Dress.
Let's tighten up, boys, tighten up.
Right dress, gentlemen. Keep the center. Don't overrun. Don't run up on the color guard. Dress it in the middle.
As we neared the Emmitsburg Road, we were in the same position as the three brigades when they finally came into range of McGilvery's battery of 41 guns, which immediately opened upon the men with solid shot, case shot, and canister. A moan went up from the three brigades as they sighted the cannon for the first time. These guns were placed in a way that they couldn't have been seen by the men until it was too late. The men instinctively recoiled away from their tormentors and started bunching together in an incohesive body of men. At the same time, a brigade of Connecticut soldiers moved into a flanking position and began firing their muskets into the flanks of Kemper's brigade, causing more and more confusion in the ranks. It was quickly falling apart. We moved forward through a small orchard, probably belonging to the Spangler farm. The trees broke the integrity of our lines and caused us to bunch together as we navigated around them. There were also deep post holes hidden in the ground around these trees, which caused more disruption in the ranks. We managed the obstacles in fine style, only because we weren't actually under fire while doing so.
Here you can see us marching almost casually, but it was not so for the men of 1863. After the battle, Lieutenant John Dooley of the 1st Virginia Infantry wrote this account. "Up, brave men! Some are actually fainting from the heat and dread. They have fallen to the ground, overpowered by the suffocating heat and the terrors of that hour. There is the line of guns we must take, right in front, but how far they appear. Behind the guns are strong lines of infantry. We see them plainly, and now they see us perhaps even more plainly. To the right of us and above the guns we are to capture, black heavy monsters from their lofty mountain sights belch forth their flame and smoke and storms of shot and shell upon our advancing lines. While directly in front, breathing flame in our very faces, the long range of guns, which must be taken, thunder on our quivering, melting ranks. Now truly does the work of death begin. The line becomes unsteady because at every step a gap must be closed, and thus, from left to right, much ground is lost. Close up the ranks when a friend falls, while his lifeblood bespatters your cheek or throws a film over your eyes. Dress to the left or right, while the bravest of the brave are sinking to rise no more. Still we press on. Oh, how long it seems before we reach those blazing guns. Our men are falling faster now. The deadly musket is at work. Volley after volley of crashing musket balls sweep through the line and mow us down like wheat before the scythe."
As we neared the Emmitsburg Road, at where we were to cross and to start our 200-yard climb up the slope to where the Union line was, I couldn't help but notice that we, as they, were still marching with our flanks fully exposed to the Union guns, both cannon and now muskets, now up on the ridge and now within deadly range. It was at this point that all the instruments of death and destruction were now played upon the men of Pickett's brigade, which included the 57th Virginia. Our hearts melted at the thought of just what these men endured. and how many of them never made it back to Virginia, to their homes, to their firesides, and to their sweethearts.
The pathway through the orchard was treacherous. There were many deep holes to trap our feet. But once we got through, we found ourselves running parallel to the Emmitsburg Pike. We marched to the opening in the fence and crossed the street, where we stopped for the fourth reading.
Gentlemen, coming up just 40 yards behind Garnett's men, Captain Poindexter of the 38th Virginia, to the left of the 57th stated, "We move like waves upon the sea, marching in perfect order and disciplined tread, guns and bayonets reflecting the bright sunlight." As the 57th Virginia closed on the rear of Garnett's brigade, the ranks were now disordered. The men were described as a mingled mass from 15 to 30 deep. Majors and colonels had lost control and the men crowded into a tight mass on the slope. Armistead, the old black hat up again at the tip of his sword, woo! Pushed through the ranks and the men of the 57th followed him in no formation whatsoever.
As we got within 40 yards of the wall, there came the order to charge. From behind the fence, the Yankee infantry rose and poured into our ranks a murderous fire. Garnett's and Kipper's men had almost entirely disappeared, and it remained to our men to do the work. Charging the wall, one veteran said to the Federals, poured a murderous volley right into our faces. A moment, the line halted and staggered, so many men went down, but the whole line bent forward, gave the Southern yell, and charged the wall. The fighting along the wall was hand-to-hand. Men fired into each other's faces. There were bayonet thrusts, cutting with swords, oaths, curses. Canisters tore through the ranks from only a few paces away, and the dead and wounded were piled in ghastly heaps. As Colonel John B. Magruder led the 57th on its final dash, he shouted, "They are ours," immediately receiving 2 bullets in his chest.
As the men reached the wall, Armistead leaped it up with his sword held high and called out, "Come on, boys, give them the cold steel. Who will follow me?" And the line surged over the stone wall and into the guns of Cushing's battery. The flag of the 57th was the fourth to be planted at Cushing's battery. Sergeant John Hutcherson, the color bearer for over a year, was shot down and killed as he approached the stone wall.
The two lines stood 15 feet apart, firing point-blank range. When seeing the hopelessness of the position, some men of the 57th threw down their muskets to surrender, and others retreated down the slope. The final color bearer of the 57th was knocked down to the ground, and the flag was captured. None of Armistead's battle flags made it back to Seminary Ridge. Okay, forward, right, center, march.
Bring it up, bring it up. Watch your footing.
Watch yourself. Whoa!
Don't run.
Dress the ranks.
We got a little bit left. Somebody's going to be lucky to
Give
be able
left
to
a
walk
little.
over.
Push left. Watch your footing.
Right about now, we're taking fire from skirmishers.
Don't bunch up in the center. Don't go over.
Cutting us down. Closing us a bunch in the middle.
Very good, gentlemen. Forward, center.
Now we're receiving full musketry from the Yankees on the hill. Cutting us down. Cutting us down.
Hey, give left us
boys,
a
give
hair.
left.
Dress your ranks. Don't run up if you have to.
Noah,
You're good. You're good.
bend in as in the storm.
Whoa. Slow down, boys. Slow down. Watch the colors. March
Give it a little bit left. Oh, happy days. Woo!
Very good, boys. Very good, gentlemen.
Batteries on the canister.
Home, boys. Over the hill, boys.
Look at that Cowan's battery.
Almost home, boys. Over the hill.
Canister. Tearing horrendous holes in the ranks. It's amazing any of us ever made it as far as we did. We're still pushing. We're still pushing.
Keep the road. Push back.
Zep country
This
wants to get there.
I want to get there.
Left, a little bit, gentlemen.
center dress.
Definitely.
A crazy dog. Armistead.
Yep, good.
How are you?
Sorry about that.
Watch out, gentlemen. Done.
We started up the slope towards the stone wall at the bloody angle. Halfway up, we were given the order to go at the double quick. We reached the lone tree and made our way over the stone wall as best we could to then rally by Armistead's monument.
Casualties during the assault: 50 killed, 126 wounded, 141 taken prisoner or missing. 471 started the advance. Around 120 were available for duty on July 4th. 67%. Just as the sun set, federal veteran stated that he went to the crest of the hill to look at the field, and no words could describe the ghastly picture. The track of the great charge was marked by bodies of men in all possible positions. Wounded, bleeding, dying, dead. Near the wall where the final struggle occurred, the men lay in heaps, the wounded wiggling, groaning under the weight of the dead. I found my head reeling, tears flowing, my stomach sick at the sight. For months, the specter haunted me, haunted my dreams, and even after 47 years, it comes back as the most horrible vision I've ever conceived. Attention battalion. Shoulder, arm. Present, arm. Right, shoulder, arm. Got it. Yes, sir. You have the visor? Yeah. Order arms. I have a small 50 on the Virginia flag. I'll put the Armistead monument, and then you gentlemen will do Don't need money for the permit?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming out today. I hope
You learn something, realize what they went through. It was approximately 8 to 10 degrees hotter then than it is today. Those men were on the fire the whole way once they topped the crest. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Anything I can do to help you in the future, let me know. Battalion is dismissed. Cheers, boys.
Hey! Hey! Hey!
Thanks for keeping up.
Good to follow in, guys. Thank you.
Thank you all for keeping up, moving up, staying dressed. All right.
Good to see you.
You need to...
Yeah.
I'm Chris Andrews. I put together the Memorial March today. A lot of times you read about what happens on the battlefields, but until you actually go out and experience it, you don't know what it was actually like. You know, following the movements of the 57th Virginia, it was an honor to walk in their footsteps, to realize the sacrifices that they made for the cause that they believed in. Hopefully our country will learn from what happened in those war years of 1861 and 65 and never repeat that again.
Yeah, it's good to be out here on July 3rd, 158 years later. And yeah, for those men, I can't imagine what it must have been like to walk across that field, face a heavy barrage of cannon and gunfire. It's good to be out here, remember them, what they went through. I was honored to live in the state of Virginia for over 3 years in Lexington. A lot of these guys came from there. They were patriotic, they loved where they were from, they loved Virginia, they loved their homes, and that's why they were out here fighting. And above all, most of them loved God, trusted in God. So yeah, it's awesome to be out here. I know Lou Armistead said that these men would have done this charge even without an officer to lead them. So that just shows the dedication and the bravery that these men had on that day, on that third day here at Gettysburg. So it's an honor to come out here and remember the men from both sides and to love and appreciate American history today. Thank you.
I came out here to spread awareness about what happened here on this dreadful day. It was hot, muggy, a long, long walk. And not everybody realizes it, but you know, it was a chance to spread awareness, chance to learn, chance to teach. I learned things today that I didn't know before, and I hope others did too.
I have my own reasons for being out here today. For the past few years, I've been researching the Gettysburg reunion of 1913 that took place exactly 50 years after the battle. Over 55,000 veterans attended from both the North and the South. On July 3rd, 1913, the survivors of Pickett's charge retraced their steps across this very field and marched towards the same men they fought against 50 years earlier. Now these men were in their 70s, 80s, and some were even in their 90s. When they reached the stone wall at the Bloody Angle, the remnants of the Philadelphia Brigade was waiting for them. One of the observers described it like this: "We could not see rifles and bayonets, but canes and crutches. We soon could distinguish the more agile ones, aiding those less able to maintain their places in the ranks." Nearer they came to the stone wall, where the Union guns had waited and where so many of their comrades had fallen. As the rebel yell broke out, after a half a century of silence, a moan, a gigantic sigh, a gasp of unbelief rose from the onlookers. It was then that the Yankees, unable to restrain themselves any longer, burst from behind the stone wall and flung themselves upon their former enemies. Not in mortal combat, but reunited in brotherly love and affection. These old veterans had not come back to Gettysburg to continue the war, but to end it forever. Now, one of the veterans said, "There is no malice in my heart. The man who could hold malice in his heart for 50 years should have died 40 years ago." Another Confederate veteran said, "We got one flag and we love it. These old boys in blue are just as we are, Americans. Our differences are settled and for all time. I'm ready to pass on to the last camping ground, happy to see this day." Many of the old soldiers that came back to Gettysburg from the 50th reunion were able to reconcile with each other. As the reunion was winding down, the old veterans were saying their goodbyes. They had such a good time that many said, let's meet back here on this exact date 50 years from now. Well, that was a promise they could not keep. And so I'm doing it for them. And that's why I'm here today, to honor these men and celebrate their reconciliation. Thanks for watching.